is an Anglo-French company that was created by a group of Englishmen. We're based in France, and it's about 50-50 with English and French people. Mostly we fly in the Côte d'Azur area. We fly at Gourdon, at Col de Blaine, La Chaise, Roquebrune, all in the south coast of France. Designing a paraglider is a complex process and has many stages throughout its development. First off, we have to agree and decide the type of wing that we're going to build, whether it's a beginner wing or a cross-country wing or competition wing or so on. And so we agree all the parameters that we're trying to aim for, and David de Gaulle is in charge of the design process, and he designs that glider using CAD software on a computer and 3D modeling and so on, which is then sent to our factory in Vietnam. We have our own factory in Vietnam which makes all of our gliders and prototypes. We have a special team in Vietnam whose sole job is to make and cut the prototype wings, which takes about 4 or 5 days from the moment David sends it till we receive it. Once we have the prototype, then it's the job of the test team to test the glider. What we're looking for initially is the feel, making sure that the glider feels good, all the lines are the correct length, the tension of the sail is good, it's not too loose or floppy or not too tight. And we really work on the handling and how the glider reacts in the air through just normal flying, how it feels in a thermal, how it feels in ridge soaring, if it has a good sink rate or a bad sink rate. And we really try and put our feelings and explain our feelings together so that we can agree on where we need to go with our development. What we're fiddling with and changing is often the tension in the sail, how much tension we have at the leading edge or trailing edge, as well as all the line lengths and so on. How much arc there is in the glider as well is very important. Once we're happy with conceptually we're happy with what we have, we then really go through the DHV testing stage, where we're trying to find out how it reacts when it all goes wrong, when we have deflations and so on. So we're testing for asymmetric deflations, symmetric deflations, the stall, the spin, beeline stalls, big ears, and importantly, especially with the beginner gliders, is how they inflate, how they launch, how they feel on the ground. They're not shooting too much, or they're not sitting back on the takeoff as well. The whole process differs from glider to glider, but generally you're looking between 6 months to a year to get a final product that we're happy with and would release and would sell it.
Some ass.
There's loads of places that you can get information these days. The internet is probably the best place. If you do a search on the internet for paragliding, you'll get lists of pages and lots of schools in your local area or the whole country. You can also contact the National Federation in each country, and they will be able to give you a list of all the schools that are available. Choosing a school depends on your area. The best thing to do is if you know someone who flies, is to ask their opinion. But otherwise, just go for your local school, because sometimes the learning process can take some time, so you don't want to be in a school that's maybe 300 kilometers away. So going to a local school, I think, is important, so that you can give the sport time and give it your weekends, which is basically what you need to be able to fly properly. Once you learn flying, I'd say the important thing is continuity. Rather than doing some days and then having a few months off and going back to it, you never get past that first stage. If you can do several days in a row, or preferably a week course, then you'll get a much better understanding and you'll progress much faster, because you're not always taking those backward steps that long breaks entail. So doing a week course is a very good idea, or if you can't take the time off work, then devoting your weekends to learning to paraglide is really important. And that carries on throughout your whole flying career. It's really important that you remain continuous in your learning process and you don't get too rusty. I think the most important thing whilst you're learning and throughout your whole flying career is ground handling. It's being able to control your glider on the ground. The takeoff is probably the area where there's most accidents, and it's the most dangerous part of the flight. So being perfect at your takeoffs is the aim. And that should never stop throughout your whole flying career. It's something that you always practice, especially if you have a period where you haven't flown for a while. Then just putting half an hour in on the ground is really useful for you. Not only does that keep you safe on the takeoff, but when you're flying in the air and you start flying in more demanding conditions, when there's stronger thermals and so on, then the skills at keeping the glider inflated on the ground are directly transposed? What's the word? Are directly related to the way that you control your glider in the air. So if you have very good skills on the ground and you can keep your glider inflated in a gusty wind or a light wind, then you'll be able to do so in the air more easily. You'll also be more relaxed, which is really important for flying. If you start to get scared and you start to tense up, then your actions and your movements are not so good. If you can be relaxed, then you'll be able to think a little bit more clearly and keep the glider flying safer. When learning to fly, or when flying, fear is a major part of our sport. We're not designed to fly at all, we're terrestrial beings. So overcoming those fears is a very important part of flying, but also having those fears are very important, because without fear you can start maybe doing reckless things, flying in conditions that you shouldn't be flying or on wings that you shouldn't be flying. Fear happens to all pilots. Every pilot goes through it, no matter what level they're at. And being able to control those fears are really important. Often fear, or that inner voice that you have, is telling you something important, and you should always listen to your inner voice. Often fear comes down to the fact that maybe you feel that your skills are not up to it, which means that, well, maybe you should take a step backwards and practice your ground handling more, or practice simple flying in smooth conditions more before you start progressing on to flying in thermic conditions or off big mountains or so on. So I think fear is a very important part of flying, and it's what keeps us alive. And the moment that you lose fear is the time that you should be careful, because that's when you might start to try and overextend yourself, maybe stepping up a glider level that's too much for you, or flying in conditions that are too strong. Flying a glider